All right. 7 o'clock, so we'll call this meeting to order. And we'll start with roll call. Jim?
Yeah, all are present other than Member Warner, who has resigned
Okay.
from the committee for personal reasons.
Okay. And do we have anyone from the public here today? It doesn't look like it.
I'll give a quick update.
Okay.
I think it probably fits here. So you may have heard that the city, we have been awarded $650,000 in federal funding for the Kensington project. So yeah, that's some wonderful news. Somewhat tempered by the fact that our water sales are about $350,000 below budget for the year because of the very rainy fall that we had. So we're still net positive, and we're very grateful that that came through. So that's, I think, probably something we'll talk about later, is what to do with some of those windfall dollars that we're planning on receiving more of in the future.
Okay, well, that's great. That's a great update.
Jim, can I ask a question? You noted for one part or one project, but should we consider that an overall savings on the overall project, or is it more specific than that?
No, I think you can consider it a savings on the overall project. The Kensington water main was always part of our $24.5 or $25 million cost estimate. So this will be going towards that overall project cost.
Thank you.
And it's about somewhere between 1% and 2% of the overall project cost when you factor in our budget shortfall this year.
Great. All right, the next item on our agenda is to receive and approve the minutes from the prior meeting. These were circulated in advance of the meeting via email. And I'll ask our secretary, Belinda Peters, whether she accepts them.
I'll make a motion that we accept the March 1st meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay. And the next item is to receive public correspondence since the prior meeting.
No one objects to approving the minutes? Awesome.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry.
And I can take your next one.
Okay.
We did receive one public comment that's been distributed to the members from Christy Hand. I won't necessarily summarize the public comment since it was provided to everybody in advance of the meeting, but it was provided and is included in our consideration. It was also City Manager Breckman provided some context also with regard to taxable values that were noted in that correspondence. And then Member Peters, I think, sent out a quick correspondence in advance of the meeting to all members with some information that she had put together. I think that is the entirety of the information that the committee received since the last meeting.
Okay. And then on the next item on our agenda is to review the 2 rate/fee calculations from our March 1 meeting.
Great.
We've got those. Okay.
I will begin by saying that Robert has provided an updated version of the spreadsheet funding tool with some sliders that is very cool. You can lock
Wow.
one of your inputs, and then you can use the slider, and it automatically calculates out the other 2 inputs. So it's very nice. It would have been nice to have this about 3 meetings ago. But for now, I'm going to go back to my spreadsheet because it gets a little more information on the screen, and for the purposes of reviewing the scenarios, we can flip back to that one if we want to explore more scenarios. But this spreadsheet was circulated out publicly on the drive, and then also to the CAC. The main change was adding 2 columns that were the 2 scenarios discussed at the last meeting, option 1 and option 2. With the difference here being the flat fee the flat ready to serve at these two levels, and then the corresponding millage at these two levels, holding this frontage, front foot charge consistent. The difference here is that the millage provides 50% of the funding under option 2, and the flat fee provides 50% of the funding under option 1. And then we also added a minimum and maximum increase row down here for all of these scenarios. We had the 95% bounds, but this is the absolute minimum and absolute maximum. And then finally, the last change was the frontage. All lots were capped at 100 feet for calculation purposes. So that now shows up in your histograms and all of the minimum and maximum increase figures.
Thank you, Jim. That's really helpful to have those up there, as well as those caps added from the last meeting. I'll go ahead and open it up for conversation among the members. If we can start with those option 1 and option 2. Of course, we're not confined to those as our only options, but we did spend considerable time last meeting coming around to those. The hope is at this meeting, we, without pressuring the body, come really, really close to actually deciding what our recommended 3 values are going to be for if we include the usage rate, which we settled earlier, and then at the end of this meeting, hopefully start talking about the disbursement of what we had hoped was funds coming. Now it's actual funds coming in terms of the impact to the rates. I'll remind the members, we do have a meeting scheduled for 1 week from today with the hope that could be our wrap meeting. But again, you worked diligently, and I'm confident you will again this evening. But I'll throw it back to you to begin the discussion on option 1, option 2, or another one you'd like Jim to run.
Got a comment. I worked through this sheet a bit the other night and played with different scenarios again. And it's very clear, obviously, and I think we all know this, that there are different percentages of how much you're allocating here, how much you're allocating there, how spread out is the chart. And I guess the main thing I'm wondering is if we have consensus on what we're looking to achieve, are we trying to keep the chart very tight? Because you could have a range that's as low as $110 that goes all the way to $1,600. Or you could have something that's $250 and it goes to $1,100. So that, I think, would help us focus where we're really headed. What are we going for? And if we've already established that, sorry if I missed that, but I feel like we don't have that yet. We're not quite there. So that's what would help me in my own decision of what I think would be the best. What does the group feel we're shooting for? So that's just a comment to anybody, and if anybody has any thoughts.
Well, I think it gets to the philosophical question of, are we trying to make this somewhat progressive, i.e., even though it's based on the size of your property and your taxable value, because, a pure flat fee makes the histogram very tight, but it basically doesn't make any accommodation for, as crude as it is, we're trying to make, in some cases, make some accommodation for ability to pay. And so I don't know, it's a philosophical question, I don't know. It feels like in the end, we're kind of splitting the baby and trying to do some of this and some of that, and I don't know what mix, again, it gets to the mix of flat versus progressive. Again, recognizing that the progressive is not perfect, that neither lot size nor taxable value is 100% progressive. So I don't know, it's a good question.
Because we can achieve a tightness or an openness if we like, and just move the numbers around to get to that. But is that what we're going for? Because I tried one scenario, and maybe we did this, excuse me, last week, where everything was 33%. And that was a huge span. So, some would say, well, that's an equal allocation of all 3 methods, so that's good. But then again, that's a really wide span, the widest of all scenarios from what I saw. So I don't know if that's the best. It really, it's up to us. What are we shooting for?
And so if I may add, that's why I sent out that email earlier today to try and set out some goals, because I believe the point that Member Morris made last week is we need to have some goals, otherwise we are kind of just splitting hairs with what we're doing. And I found in my mind, the best way that I could justify it is there is some concern that there be a flat fee. I believe you can justify that flat fee based on the mandated portion of the project, because that's the service lead line. I mean, there are gonna be some fluctuations in the cost depending on the size of the lead and different things, but that's really what we can hold flat. And so as a explanation of why we came up with our rates, I believe we can use that as a flat fee. And then I also believe that there is, as I believe you said at one of the prior meetings, the value of the homes are going to increase because the lead service lead lines have been replaced. I believe there will also be an impact because the system as a whole, we're going to have better water pressure. It's going to be better for the fire department, so it just increases the value of our homes. And so I look at that as being the part that can be more of the progressive tax of what the millage would be. And I look at, loosely again, the flat frontage fee as being somewhat of a progressive because it's based on the size of your lot. But in order, I think, too, to make a decision maybe on what we're trying to define, if you look at what the biggest increase is, if it's a full millage, it's $1,700. And if you look at option 2, there's been a $200 decrease to that highest point. And over 30 years, that's $6,000. I mean, that's a reasonable amount. And I think looking at the percentage that the increase is better than a flat fee because there is such a diversity in homes and values of the homes that are in this community. And so that's why I put forward a rationale that I did as a goal of what we're trying to meet. We're never, I don't believe it's fair when we talk about fair, that we close the tail so much that everybody's in the middle, because then we're just shifting the costs from the tails to everybody else.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that's fair.
Right.
So that's part of my justification for putting what I did today, just to help us, decide on that split.
Could we put in a scenario with the 33% for each of the 3 categories?
I can give you the numbers that I have for that, if that would help.
It would.
So I put $4.50 for the per foot, $42.50,
How much?
$42.50 for the second, and then $1.7405 for the next.
Okay.
And again, this was just to look at different scenarios, not to say I think this is great or anything, just what
Right.
would it look like if we had everything equally allocated? In this example, it's about half of the levy of what we would have had, like 3.5 mils. This is pretty much half that.
Mm-hmm.
And everything else obviously makes up the difference in equal measure.
So basically, we're taking the ready to serve back to its previous level, right? And essentially then half the millage and then making up the difference with the frontage. Okay. I mean, there's some logic to that. I mean,
I guess when I look at it and I think about the frontage fee, because that's in the logic behind it, I guess maybe that's what you're saying, is that if you're reducing the millage on the theory that that's kind of a ham-handed way to be progressive about
Mhm.
allocating the costs, and that this front foot charge is a little bit more precise, when you're talking about burden on the system. So it makes, that makes some sense to me too, to be putting it in the footage charge rather than on the ready to serve.
I was concerned about the span, if that's a large concern for us, because there is quite a span there. It seemed to me it was the widest of all scenarios. However, we've mentioned we have 3 separate options that we think each one has some merit. This would be one way of allocating all 3 of those equally. And then the other one was that, many people felt that the millage was a way that was more punishing newer homeowners and things like that. Well, I think the frontage charge is, in general, it's going to equate fairly well to the property value, you would think, for the most part. So this could be a way of shifting some of this kind of to a very similar way of billing for it, but it's not going to punish those necessarily the new homeowners as much. It's not really based on that.
When really looking at the overall dollar amount that we need, 1/3 is for the red line replacements and 2/3 is for the water main replacements.
So it flips up that way.
which would fund that a little bit more toward the, front footage.
So Jim, would you happen to have any observations about the histograms as compared to previous examples in this one? What do you see there that might be a concern?
I think that the histograms show, graphically, but really I always look here because you can get the clearest comparison. And the 33, the thirds option falls in between the scenario 1 and scenario 2 we looked at last meeting. It's a judgment call.
Yep.
But under any scenario, compared to the full millage option, you've reduced that upper bound. But yeah, again, the question is how far do you want to go with that?
And then the lowest amount has gone up by like $80-some. So that's worth noting too. We're bringing that up, we're bringing the other one down more significantly than the other one has gone up. So that was the main thing I had to bring up for today. If anyone has anything else?
And that is right, Jim, about the funding, that about 1/3 of the project budget is for the mandated lead service line. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the amount that the lead service lines represent in the project, if you only did the lead service lines, it costs more than if you're doing them at the same time as the water main. So, it's kind of between 1/3 and
If you did, okay.
40%.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Anybody?
I mean, looking between option 2 and this option,
It's not a lot.
significantly different, right? There's a little bit of movement in the middle, like, something where we get more here and there.
Right.
I think either one, to me, like, the reason we're even here, right, is because Henley is imperfect in how it sort of creates this issue. We are trying, like, one issue to say, like, how can we make it a little bit more perfect, knowing that, like, the system is flawed, so we're gonna have to go in. And so, and the system is flawed by, like, we have this crazy tail for 10, 15, 20 homes, and I think option 2, this one, the one that we're proposed, all pretty much kind of achieve that same objective, which is kind of bringing that end tail. So, I mean, someone's going to pay the most. Like, it's literally the fact of any project like this. So some home is going to end up paying the most, but ideally, this is a more fair version of how we allocate these costs across the community.
And in terms of a point that Tom has brought up many times, explaining the rationale behind it, do you see, Tom, from your point of view, any of these three options that is easier to explain than another or more logical?
Well, I mean, the third, you know, either of the options, it kind of matches the millage to the lead service lines, has some inherent, you know, and then we're using the rest, I mean, it matches the ready to serve to the, so option, the third or scenario 2, where you take the ready to serve, basically flat fees paying for the mandated work, and then the variable is paying for work we all agree we need to do to keep our city nice and functioning. So those are, I think, personally, I like the ones that pull the tail down a little bit more. I mean, I think, you know, the closeness to the vote, well, on one hand, I'm sympathetic, millage passed, so elections count. But on the other hand, the closeness to the vote, I think, tells me that there were a lot of people who were concerned about the regret that imperfect with Headley and whatnot, that the tail was pretty long and was penalizing some people pretty harshly. I think those are some points that we can make.
Well, just to kind of go on what you said, Tom, it's, you know, as we slide these numbers up and down, also we're going to slide up and down, the people aren't going to be happy no matter what we take. And we have to understand, I think we all came in here knowing that, and we're doing the best we can, trying to make, you know, take the tails off. I got one question, and I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. I'll just play kind of devil's advocate. My wife hates it. Really hates it. Is there a way that we can cap how much either percent increase or dollar increase there is, and also cap what the minimum is to pull them in just a little bit, saying nobody's going to be responsible for any more than X, and somebody's not going to be responsible for any less than Y. So, you know, you're capping how much out of pocket it is, so to speak, either, or minimizing it too, where somebody say, well, I only go up $100. Well, no, I mean, is there a way to tighten that up by artificially putting a maximum in there?
The short answer is no, you can't put some kind of mechanism that accomplishes that.
Okay.
What you have to do is use the three numbers
Right.
to achieve your desired outcome. So if you wanted to, just looking at the numbers and the way that everything works together, I think there is some correlation between property value and lot width. It's not a perfect correlation,
Oh, no.
but there is some. So if you wanted to bring that maximum down and the minimum up, you're probably looking at taking scenario 1, and I think you have to reduce either the millage or the front foot charge and increase that flat ready to serve per bill to bring those tails in even further.
I did have one question, Jim. So this came up, my neighbor, I think the person actually behind me, he lives in Ferndale, but he actually has a parcel that's in Pleasant Ridge. Are any of those accounted for where it does not have street access and it's just basically just land?
Right, no, those are not accounted for. All of
Okay.
those properties have very, very, very small
Yep.
taxable values
Okay.
in Pleasant Ridge. I mean, to the tune of like $4,000 or $5,000 of taxable value. So they will pay a millage.
Yep.
None of the other charges will hit them.
Okay. Just want to make sure it wasn't on that sheet.
So it's not going to move the needle basically at all?
Yeah, it doesn't. Okay. Wanted to make sure those bottom ones weren't.
Right.
Those properties, I'm like, that's a lot.
Yep, those are actual Pleasant Ridge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other comment I'll make is a couple of the scenarios I messed with, I would eliminate one of these three factors. So I took off the per foot charge or took off the ready to serve just to see what it would do. Is there anyone who's not in agreement that we're looking at adjusting all three of these things? Because that's what made me wonder. Is there consensus that we are going to use all three of these?
That was my assumption.
Okay.
Me too.
You mean zeroing out one of those?
Not zeroing anything.
I mean, when you took some of them out, did something jump out at you and say, well, this is a better mousetrap, or?
No,
Yeah.
no, it
And
didn't.
if you look at the rows E, F, and G, you kind of
You can
see
see,
those
yeah.
numbers.
So one example, I got rid of the ready to serve, and that stretched from $27 to $1,700. So that was, ridiculous.
Mhm.
Then the other one, I took off the per foot charge, and that took it from, it was $213 to $1437 was the span. So that put us at a $65 ready to serve and a 2.57 millage. But again, I'm not sure really that gets us any closer to where we wanted to be, or not close enough to where we wanted to go with shifting some of the stuff away from the millage. It was just a number I was looking at that made me wonder, are we all on the same page with three things that we want? Sounds like we are.
Yeah, they're all variables to be looked at.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think there's an underlying logic in each of them. I mean, the flat
Right.
fee is, something we traditionally had, millage passed, and then
Yeah.
I haven't heard any real pushback against the frontage thing, except the concern that some people, once you cap it for somebody who's got this unnaturally crazy lot for whatever reason.
Right.
So there seems to be an inherent logic to those three levers.
Mhm.
It's
So,
just a
yeah,
question.
capping out at 100, I think, is good.
Yeah.
Kind of brings that in a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Solve that.
And I do like the frontage fee because there is inherent value to property, to the land itself.
Yeah.
If you take a house on a 50-foot wide lot and put it on a 100-foot lot, you could sell it for more, obviously. So our property in itself has value.
If I may, just listening to the conversation, looking at what's now labeled data input and then option 2. So data input and then the CAC option 2, which kind of has that 33% flat, matching your mandate, and then plays between your millage and your front footage as your two progressive options. Asking the group, is there just those two, and then you can see what happens on the numbers, the third tightens them up a little bit. But just of those two, is there a preference that people have in terms of going half of it millage and balancing it with the front foot, or a third? Because locking that front foot, locking the flat fee to 1/3 seems to be at least easily explainable, the other two being the progressive.
Mhm.
I would just ask if, of those two options, is there one favor?
Between the data input and the option 2?
Yeah.
I'm on the fence.
I mean, given what we heard from the voters, I think data input matches more closely what we heard from
The negative comments, you mean?
Yeah.
well, and also just the fact that the village vote was relatively close.
Right.
And, I mean, I'm actually leaning toward the third for that reason. I like taking the millage down and
Right.
moving more of it to the frontage. I think it keeps it relatively progressive, but addresses what was a real concern, that 3.5 mils is
Right.
a lot of money. It's a big jump.
And just
But
by
that's
the
just
math,
me,
it's
yeah.
1/2 of the, as someone pointed out, 1/2 of the approved.
Yeah.
Which, there's no magic in 1/2, but it seems that that's, it's
More
how the math works.
Significant.
When there's underlying logic to it, is okay, we're only going to implement half the millage. We heard you, we heard the concerns.
Right.
We'll implement half the millage. and,
Yeah.
Now, we'll see, the commission will put together a budget, have a public hearing, and then we'll see if people really, what they really think about it.
Yeah. See how right we were.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm sure you're going to have people are for, people are going to be against.
Right, right.
Right.
So,
And I assume, since there will be, correct me if I'm wrong in the process, but recommendation will go to city commission will do a public meeting on it, people will have a chance to provide comment, city commission will take a vote.
Yeah, that's going to be up to the city commission, how they
Yeah.
want to proceed with that. Obviously, time is not unlimited, and we have to have
Yeah.
a budget adopted by June. There is a budget public hearing.
Yeah.
So it could be handled as part of that.
That's what I was thinking as a public hearing for the budget, that would probably be the logical place to,
And certainly when a recommendation is delivered, we want to make sure that everyone knows,
Yeah.
you know, anyone who wants to know can easily know what that is.
Since there doesn't seem to be anybody like, standing up and saying like, this is the exact one, you know, is it possible to say like, this was the recommended one, these were considered and sort of had support as well? Not to completely punt, but, you know, to at least begin to show, right, like, these were there, and, you know, to allow sort of that conversation of like, it's a, you know, $150 difference on the max, you know, coming back, but it's already $200-300 down, this is where it shifts, just so that that's there, as opposed to like, the recommendation is this, yes or no.
right.
If I may, Mark, I think that is perfectly within your, within the goals of this committee. If data input is the one that we come to consensus on, the other, I would suggest we could put in the memorandum presented by the chair and myself, that option 1 and option 2, we're also given consideration for these reasons. So the public has that information as well. I think that's perfectly within your ability to, is that a motion, Mark?
No. Motion to hedge as much as possible, yes.
I think if I were on the commission, I would want a very clear recommendation. After setting this group up
Yeah.
and going to all this trouble,
Yeah.
I would want it very clear, and as a member of the group, I want to make a very clear recommendation. So if we have a minority opinion, that's okay, in my opinion, but I'd like it to be pretty clear that this is what we want. This is what we think is best, based on all of our discussions and all of our data that we've taken a look at and everything else.
Yeah.
So you're saying we don't say these are the 2 options were considered? You're saying this is one we are,
No, I think it could be mentioned, but I think this is our clear recommendation.
Right.
And then these others had discussion as well.
I don't think, you know, my opinion is whatever we pick, I don't think, I think we should say the 2 other options were considered. Don't present those numbers, but this is the clear one that we are recommending.
Yeah,
Sounds good. And here's why.
And here's why.
right. And we can certainly say that there were other options that were discussed at length,
Oh, yeah.
and because this seemed to be the most, I hesitate to say the word equitable because it won't be equitable, but
Right.
yeah, that it had, I don't know, seemed to be the best way to go.
To address them.
So, talking about the numbers, could you put up Belinda's recommendation? And I guess maybe want to talk about it is the percent increase on when we go a third. We have a good number that are hitting over 9, 10, 11% increase. Jim, I can give you your numbers. It's 2.4 for the frontage, $52.50 for the flat fee.
I have it, Jim, if you know.
You have this written down? Okay. Okay, Tom, if you don't mind starting over with that?
Yep, it's $2.40 for the front footage, $52.50 for the flat RTS bill. And then it was 2.1478 for the millage. I think that brings it exactly to it, so if you scroll down to percentage increase, so it does tighten it up a little bit more on the percentage increase, but you're also increasing the minimum amount at the same point. So that might get us to where we have a tighter percentage increase. There is a little more wider at the top end, but it's not significant, so that was just some observations I made compared to the 33, 33, 33
Yeah.
versus this one, which
Well-
I was kind of surprised at the results.
Well, the big lever there is the flat fee, that anything you do to increase the flat fee will tighten up the percentage. Until if you've made it all flat fee, the percentage increase is the same for everybody. So that's the lever.
Right.
Progressive, regressive, however you want to term it, yeah.
For comparison, if you have those numbers recorded, I have an example with the 5250 also.
Okay.
Okay, so we see that this is at, 197 is the lowest, 1367 is the highest. This one kind of brings up the minimum slightly more, and it brings down the maximum more. So I had 356 for the first value, and then 1.7 even for the millage. So again, that's about half the millage, but how does it change if we affect things a little differently? I don't know if I prefer this over the previous, but it depends what we're going for.
Yeah.
I would say I don't have a mission personally to raise the minimum up necessarily, but if it ends up that way, then it makes the most sense, then that's what happens.
And I will say, the reason I came up with this split I did, and I'm not wedded to that, because, I mean, I think at this point, we really are just cutting hairs. I
Right.
mean, we're so close, and everything's right in the middle. I'm giving a little more voice to the millage being passed. And my reasoning for doing that is I spent 35 years in local government. There's always a vocal, a very large, a vocal minority. The majority is usually silent, and they don't come to the meetings. And so I just believe, that's why I believe we need to respect the vote. And not put it all on the vote, because that is, 3.5 mils, but respect it to the point that I think it needs to be a little bit higher than the 1.7. We're a democracy. The people voted on Headley, although nobody really realized what the unintended consequences were of Headley. But that's, what we voted on. And like I said once before, I voted no, but I still believe the right thing to do is to put a little bit heavier weighting on the millage rate.
I kind of like, I do like the 1/3 for each. The flat fee is the most regressive, but I do see your point on the millage, I really do. That's why this is tough.
I had some conversations.
I don't envy your job.
I had some conversations with some people over the weekend that, once they found out I was on the board, I heard opinions. And they made me kind of think of different things. All right, some people I talked to had bigger lots, so they were worried about the frontage fee. And their statement was, well, just because I have a bigger lot, everybody's using that line, even though it's still the main line, but if I'm paying for that much, my argument back would have been, well, because you have a 100-foot lot or whatever, then your house is worth more. And as I've stated before, and we stated earlier, that your house is gonna go up more because this is gonna be off the table. But I did realize at that point that you don't wanna put it more on there, on the front footage. So I kind of agree now, even though I came up with the 1.75 by splitting them all down the middle at 50%, I kind of do like being a little bit higher on the millage because the millage did pass. If you want to say the millage passed by 55%, what's 55% of 3.5? But so it should be higher than that because that was who voted and said it should be at up to 3.5. So what Belinda said when she came out with the 2.17 and the 52 and still having a front footage fee, I actually kind of like those numbers. And I would almost motion that we vote on it, but, I mean, I kind of like them that much as I looked through them. It seems to affect the smaller, cheaper houses to a higher percentage, but seeing as they're already paying less, even if they go $200 or $300, that increases that percentage because they're so low. You take the higher taxable and the people that are paying a lot of money, they're at about 5 to 6%. Some people are at 11, 12% or something like that, but because they're so much higher, they're still paying more. And your numbers are still in between $200 and $1,300 all year, even for the heavy users.
Another point, Damien, I think you made it last meeting, was that maybe it was you said you you voted for it, but you knew we were gonna have this process and we were gonna fine tune things.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I think a lot of it was, this is the option that was presented. I know this stuff's gotta get done. I wasn't allowed to check this one, or this one. I could only say yes or no on this and then have to wait however long to get another option again. So some people may have just taken the best that they had. This is the only choice we had. It's either this or nothing. And I know it's gotta get done, so I'm not gonna choose nothing. You know, it's easy to read into these votes and see whatever you see on either side of it. But, you know, the city is allowed to levy up to whatever. So even if it's 0.5, you know, they could do that. But then you have all this other stuff that does kind of go against what the vote was. So where's the balance? For me, you know, I wasn't really convinced when I threw this out there, but the 1/3 each way, I prefer that one, just because we have 3 factors, kind of allocate them equally. It's easily explained, which is a point that Tom often makes, and I think that one is good. It's very simple. And 1/3 is the amount of the mandated part. Of course, you can allocate that 1/3 anywhere in any one of those 3 areas. But if they're all the same, we have 3 factors. We had 3 main schools of thought on this. Here they all are, all equally represented. That's at least how I look at it.
I'd wager if you checked with most of the people who voted, whether they voted yes or no, they didn't have any idea that there might be a commission that would look at this.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I heard it kind of in passing at one of the city commission meetings after the vote. I mean, this was, you know, when the new commissioners were sworn in, it was mentioned, and hadn't heard anything about it before that.
Well, it was out there because the commission actually passed a resolution before the vote. So
Okay.
there would be a CAC.
Oh, okay.
But
I missed that then.
people, well, people, you know, don't pay a lot of attention.
Right.
But it's kind of good. I think those people need to be, I should say, we need to be educated voters. I mean, if I'm going to vote for something, I'm going to do my research.
Jim, just to confirm, the 4250 as the ready to, for service, that covers what currently?
Well, it's fluid, right?
So that has been increasing in anticipation of this project. That has funded water and sewer maintenance, lining of the sewers, cleaning of the sewers, also the water meter swap-out project. The water meter project was a $450,000 project. So that was paid for in the last budget year and partially in this budget year. And then that source of funding is being rolled towards this water infrastructure
So
project.
that's essentially maintenance of the existing system.
Yes.
And do you expect that to increase over the next 20 years? Or do you think that, or do we have a report that says, because we're getting this done, we won't need this? That's not a problem we're going to have.
Yeah, the only X factor, we know we are rebuilding our water distribution system. So that's not going to be, that's going to be taken care of. The only other part of it then becomes the sewers. But we have a very good sense. We just cleaned and televised all of our sewers. So we have a very, very good idea of where we stand with those. And we have, you know, a built-in long-term plan to keep maintaining those sewers. So I don't see anything.
So essentially, if you left it at 4250, we essentially be good. And that's the 33%, that's why I asked.
Yeah. And then once we pay off the loan or finish this water infrastructure project, we probably don't need that 4250. But for the coming decades, we will.
If I just may make a suggestion, because I feel like we're coming close to a place where we can kind of take the temperature of the room. For that, and please object if you'd like, because we've been coalescing around what I'll call the middle option, which is the data input, the CAC option 2, and then I'd like to see, Jim, is that live, your row C, if we change row C to the 3rd option?
It's not, but let me do this. Let me replace option 1 with these numbers.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
And then take this back to the thirds.
Yeah, which I can give.
Didn't like
Crash the
that.
system.
Not want to see this.
Too much computing.
This is just coffee, but.
You have a function and a little key on top. It's got a monitor picture on it. Changes your output.
It's set up on screen mirroring.
So, while Jim's doing, my preference is to keep the ready to serve 4250 and figure out the balance between the front footage and the village. I just think that, and I feel like we kind of kicked around the extra $10, but it seems like most people are comfortable with the 4250 and just kind of balancing the ready to serve, I mean, the village and the front foot charge.
I agree with that.
Does anybody? Okay, so I think we sort of there, and I think we can sort of have a conversation between front foot and village, and hopefully get a number of off they go.
So if we're staying at 42, then the two scenarios we have, as Jim's bringing up, the 33% scenario keeps it at 4250. The difference between the scenario 2, or option 2, I should say, takes the millage basically to 2.5. So it's the millage of 2.5 or millage of 1.75, and then it's balanced by your front foot fee. So that goes back. Hang on, don't do anything, Jim. So it's option 2 or data input. No. Yes. Yeah, data input's the 33% one. So that's where you're playing between your two progressive numbers, which you want to weigh closer. Half of the millage or 2.5 of the millage.
Because without the per foot, it would all just go to the millage.
Right.
And one of the main concerns of the millage was that it's punishing a certain segment of our community. So if we move that portion out, that was the justification for moving that out to the per foot. Because that is a similar way to build based on value, but without that negative.
So,
That was the thinking.
Well, I would always, I'd ask now, Jim, if you could, not that I want you to touch your computer again, bring up the graphs that Robert brought. So now that you can lock 42 in, you can start moving the graphs back and forth.
no, we have to use that for sure.
You have to lock one of the other two and set it with the slider.
Can I lock this one now?
Nope.
Yeah, lock it now.
Just gotta set it with the slider instead of typing it up top.
Yeah, but that should still work, because it's gonna calculate off of that value.
Okay.
We'll double check the numbers.
All right,
just to
can
make
you
sure.
slide to 2.54 on millage? Good. So that's the,
So we just recreated this option.
that's option 2.
Which column has the percentages that correspond to those sliders? Is it B?
Right here.
Okay.
B.
B, yeah, data input, B.
Okay.
Would it be fair to say that if we look at the histogram and we looked at the percentage distribution, that the most equitable solution would be that the majority are seeing the same percentage increase?
Well, no.
Yeah, again, but if you go by percentages, that's where you start punishing the higher
Right.
houses. Because if a guy's already paying big taxes and you're charging the same interest or same percentage as like paying lower taxes, then the lower tax is gonna get the bigger deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but in the same respect, most of the houses, not all, with the higher taxes, also have the larger footage up front.
Not all, but yeah.
Yeah, but so sliding those back and forth, I don't think it's make a whole lot of no difference, but a whole lot of difference to either end, because those two seem to be,
Yeah,
step.
it doesn't seem to make a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah, stay there. That's exactly right, and as Belinda said earlier, we're now kind of splitting hairs. And the sliders are great. Right now, we're at scenario 2. If you bring your millage down, which will bring your per foot up as we approach that 33%, we can look at the numbers on the bottom and you can compare the two on your ranges. And why don't we do that real quick? So you go to 40, 450, 174. Close enough. So if you scroll down a little bit, Jim, if we really focus on column B and column D, in terms of your min, your max, and your percentages. So you have a tighter percentage with your option 2, but a wider variance on dollars. And with the third, you have a tighter percentage on, or tighter dollars, but wider on percentages. But not by a substantial amount in either direction. So I think at this point, people kind of need to take a position if you want a closer dollar or a closer percentage based on these two very close options.
Or if you feel that explaining it, you know, by the way it's broken down by percentages
Sure.
is important,
Mhm.
you know, regardless of the small differences between the
I mean, I
percentage
personally,
and dollars.
I personally feel that it is. I also personally feel that it, again, it respects the desire to not carry all of this on the millage, even though the frontage is kind of an imperfect analog for village, because it gets at similar things, larger, more valuable property. I mean, I really come around to like the third feels.
See, I like what Belinda put, I mean, we did pass the millage, and
Yeah.
that's where my
Yeah.
mind's at.
Yeah.
I'm with Tom. I like third.
It's fairly easy to explain. It's going to make everybody a little bit unhappy, which I guess is our job.
The third, the third, the third.
Or it's inevitable. But that's just me.
Yeah.
I understand the rationale for
I
looking
do
at the other as well.
You could probably go with, you know, either rationale.
Yeah.
And
Seriously.
At the same, it's materially not different,
Yeah.
not different across the board, so, yeah.
I think that's accurate. I think the people that are going to be unhappy are going to be unhappy with either of these, and
Yeah.
I like that we keep going back to a rational explanation. And I appreciate Kate just mentioning, you know, that is the third piece. Percentage, the dollars, and then something that's rationally attachable or explainable. Is there anyone out there that'd like to make a motion to a recommendation with the knowledge that all three will be mentioned in the report, but that there'll be a clear preferred option?
Or could we just take a show of hands for preference?
Absolutely. Would anyone like to show me their preference on a third, so the one that's in the variable column right now?
No.
So I got.
I'm just trying to say what my preference is. I'm not saying I would not disagree with this.
Can I
So-
see a little preference on option 2, so that's column D?
It doesn't add up.
There's a third option out there, or maybe a fourth.
Could
So
I ask?
I was gonna say, I like
Yeah.
Belinda's idea more than.
Okay.
Oh, okay,
Two.
cool.
Yep.
I was gonna say, I can go either way there. It's, you know, out of my pocket, it's probably gonna be exactly the same amount, so I can
Right.
go, doesn't matter.
Right.
I'll
That's-
give you that one real quick, Jim, if you want to put it up there.
Which
Oh,
one?
it's
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
not, which
It's
one
in
is,
C.
it's in,
Option, this is the Peter's
Where's
option.
Why not name it?
Yeah.
Linda.
I think this was the foreman option.
Foreman and-
So-
This is the,
I think what you can do with
Yes.
that option also is you can make the flat fee $42.50, but maybe reduce down a little bit the front footage fee and just take the millage up a little bit. And that way you're accomplishing the same thing. I was hesitant about making the flat fee, or the ready to serve fee, I'm sorry, $52.50. But I did. But I think if we hold it at $42.50, maybe take the millage rate up to 2%, or, I mean, 2.0, and then see where that puts the front footage. It puts a little bit more on, weight on the millage. All we're doing, I mean, my goal in all this is to be able to say a third, the flat fee is going for the mandate, because I think those match up really well. The other 2/3 part of the funding is going to the system as a whole.
You use the blue cells here, Jim, to go. Set the millage at 2. Actually, no, you need the sliders.
It'd be a lot easier, I think, with the
Yeah.
sliders.
Yeah, the sliders is where you get your number for your, solve for your front footage, I guess.
Just wanted to
Can
say,
you lock 2 of them?
Can you like
And then
2?
it'll just solve for the third?
no.
Or no, you can't, so you have to have 2 variables.
But you just drag it, okay.
Basically, as the millage goes up, the percentage distribution decreases.
There you go.
And really, your spread on the percentages is only a couple of percent. So even if you went 3.5 mils, your difference between your high and your low end is negligible, really.
I just want to say, I think both of them are great. I'm just giving my preference, but I would gladly agree on the third.
And one other thing that just as a consideration for the third, is that if there are any adjustments to funding that's available, although it doesn't sound like we're going to get a lot of grants, it's an addition, there's not a lot of found money to be expected, but then it's easy, you could, if you wanted to allocate it the same way, you could as well, as a reduction or something,
Let's hold that thought.
Yeah, that's different.
We've got the option that's up there, which brings our millage up a little bit from the third, a third. There was almost consensus on a third. Do we get any closer with consensus on this one? Or those that are in the third, a third camp, you're pretty happy there?
I would say we probably should go with third, because I think this would be hard to explain. too.
Awesome.
So,
All right. Is there a motion out there now?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, John.
I'll step my foot out there.
Somebody has to be brave.
Do it. Yeah, I'll make a motion to do a third.
A second.
Was that, the second was for?
Who was our second?
Jay.
Form. So then, any objections?
Yeah, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Got it. Robert, would you like to declare anything for us to offer into the report as something that was different or other optional or another way to think about it?
No, I think, given the majority prefers the general third approach, it's not 12 angry men here, so I just say I look at the percentages, and there's really not much difference when you. The reason I created the sliders in the first place was really for myself, so I could quickly see if I'm changing these numbers, how it's affecting the distribution of the cost to people. And it really, there's so little variance in terms of when you get to a certain range that, at 3.5 mils, the majority of people are paying 6 to 7%. And it's still the majority of people paying 6 to 7% with this setup as well. So it's just a lower number of houses are doing that.
Great. I appreciate that, and we'll make sure to include it in the report as best as I can summarize. If everyone around the table is comfortable, we might be able to make some progress on the receipt of external funding. And I've actually heard, I don't mind kicking off this part if everyone's okay with that. I've actually heard 2 comments that we've kind of put in the parking lot. One we just heard a few minutes ago, which is, keep it at a third, a third, a third. That was the rationale, so anything we applied, we're going to apply evenly. I've also heard keep the flat fee as it is, because we're linking it to the mandated infrastructure, so that would stay at 44, and then you would adjust the other 2 as a slider down. So you would lose your third, a third, a third, but you'd keep your flat fee as is. And Pat or Lynn, I forget who, Pat, you gave me that at the last meeting. Thank you.
Well, my suggestion was that we would use the ready-to-serve, decrease the ready-to-serve, and leave the other 2 as they were, since although Jim's explanation with that made me realize that I hadn't really thought it out totally.
Okay. So
Just that it could be changed more quickly, but at the same time, if you're getting money over a number of years, it isn't going to be something really that,
right.
and that may be the way to do it, though, since the taxes would wait until the next budget year. But you said, too, that even at the ready-to-serve, that would be set within the budget for the coming year. Is that correct?
Right.
That's correct.
Any adjustments likely would be made and the next time rates are set.
Yes.
So they're all equitable in that way, and they'll be changed at the same time. So
Yeah.
I leave it to you to start talking about if you'd like to adjust all 3 downward, or if there's a different, which kind of, maybe that's the base start.
Yeah.
Anything we apply would keep Jim would put it in the model and make it a third, a third, a third, those 3 items. I'd ask you to kind of discuss that and then other options from there.
I think we need to keep it at a third, a third, a third. If we try to explain it away any other way, I think it's going to be tough to explain. And if we just reduce, the RTS fee, that's going to be, people with the higher tax are going to be mad. How come, they're getting something that I'm not getting decreased? And vice versa. I think we need to keep it a third. It's easy to explain.
I do think philosophically, this is a little bit like, the if I win the lottery question. I mean, given the size of this project, the number of decades it's scheduled over, I wouldn't count, even the amount we got, like you say, in the end isn't, I think you're right, we need to philosophically say, if a giant pile of money falls out of the sky, this is philosophically how we think we should approach it, but.
I think if I would add, just realistically, the chances of finding more, $650,000 free money opportunities are probably not very high. There's an opportunity for us to get money from the state revolving loan fund, and that would be, a portion of that, hopefully, would be grant or loan principal forgiveness. But there's also a finance cost that comes along with that. So we would be getting free money, but we would also be taking on interest payments. And the benefit is you can get all the work done up front, and then we would have a known and unchanging loan payment that would extend into the future. So what would happen is that over time, our annual cost would then not be increasing. It would stay steady. So as the price of everything else goes up, we would reap that benefit of having a fixed cost. So as these numbers then don't change as much from year to year, that's how, over time, it becomes a relatively smaller portion of the water fund budget, a relatively smaller payment out of household income. I think that's, if that makes sense to everybody. I think that's probably the most realistic scenario for how outside money will impact us. It will accrue over time as our loan payments don't change.
But that wouldn't change the sort of philosophical position of saying that any reduction we can make should be done equally. Because that question came up again and again and again, well,
Right.
if we get money.
But,
So
but
I
at
think-
the same time, the ready-to-serve revenue is taking care of existing problems. It's not the new problem, it's the existing problems. So I would think that you still want to lock that ready-to-serve fee and split any found money between the other two, half-half.
This is what Jim was describing a little bit last week, because I was saying, it seems like you'd have to raise it, because that's not new money. He was saying, well, like tonight, I don't envision any other expenses, et cetera, so we can allocate that full amount just to this project and we'll be fine. If that's true, then we don't, it seems like, you'd think you'd want to build in some extra there, though, just in case, but it sounds like it's not really a concern. So that's what I've observed about.
Sorry. So I have a question. All this funding, is it only, excluding the RTS, is it only for the infrastructure improvement, or can it be allocated to other projects?
Personally, I would have a hard time allocating millage revenue to other projects.
But can it be, is my question.
It could be for water distribution, yeah. I wouldn't want to do that because we have other levers to pull for other projects. And it's just, we had to take on the sewer cleaning project and the sewer lining project. And those were new things that we did in the last 6 years. We just did it within the framework of the overall water fund, and we made it happen without, making huge waves in the water rates that people really sort of noticed or got upset about. That's just what we would do in the future with smaller projects. It's just the scale of this water infrastructure project we have that makes it, out of our normal mode of business for handling problems. And that's why, something's going to come up, but, I'm not concerned. We'll handle it.
It's like a small ripple.
It's a small
Versus
ripple.
this
It's
massive tidal
instead
wave of this.
the tsunami.
Yeah.
And by that you mean that there are reserves built into the budget? I mean, that's what we're talking about, right?
Right, there's
Yeah.
reserves built in the budget. And if we need to raise, $100,000 for a sewer repair, we're talking about raising a ready-to-serve charge and a usage rate by, 50 cents each for over the course of the year. It's not,
If you have to do it, okay.
right.
And I would imagine that having just replaced all of the water infrastructure, there's going to be less kind of big ticket items that would pop up.
We made it 100 years without touching it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at now.
That's why we're here, right?
Which is how you end up with a tsunami, but, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Talking about funding replacements if we do get money from the government. And I know we're talking about, okay, how can we also explain this to individuals? And if it is coming from the federal government's revenue is primarily generated by progressive taxes.
Mhm.
So if we wanted to say that we don't want to touch the RTS because it's a flat amount, we could use the argument, well, this comes from a progressive source, we're going to reduce progressive taxes as a result. That might just be some logic, that's an option, but it's just something to consider that we might be able to just say, okay, we're reducing the millage rate, and we're not going to touch the RTS, or we're going to reduce the front footage. So.
These numbers we're talking about are for today, but what about in 5 years, 10 years? How will these numbers stand up? Are they going to be kept? Are they going to be changed? What is the expectation?
It's a little bit of an unknowable question. Under normal circumstances, they would all go up at the rate of inflation every year. So your 4250 would be adjusted up at 2 or 3% a year. Same thing with the front foot charge. And then the millage would be also probably generate the same sort of percent increase in revenue. What that number is from year to year will change depending on as homes sell and all those other things that go into the property tax revenue formula. But that would be my expectation for how that would adjust over time, is it would be, you know, the water rates adjust about the rate of inflation every year already, other than when we've been building up the flat ready-to-serve charge in anticipation of this. But the water rate itself has been going up about the rate of inflation, so there'd be that level of increase.
Given that the economy is projected to go into a recession, how will that affect our revenue for this project?
Using these levers, not much, because the front foot charge and the flat ready-to-serve charge are just, that's the charge. The millage revenue would depend on what property values do. Given that you've got 1.75 unused mills under the cap, the millage could adjust upwards if property values dropped in the city to generate the same amount of revenue that we need. But, you know, even during a recession, property values take so long to kind of work through the system before that shows up in revenue change. It's usually 24 months, maybe 3 years before it really fully prices in. But even then, you typically don't see, other than 2008, large drops in revenue from property values falling. So
I think that's a
should be
good
okay.
reason to have that, using basically half the millage gives us that buffer to account for, you know, decreases in property values and vice versa if we have a good increase in property values.
And it's also insulation against rollbacks over time. But I think with the motion that we voted on, it was purely the percentage, not the numbers specifically. So those numbers can shift as long as the percentages remain in alignment. So like, for example, if we get a $500,000 and we just subtracted that off the total amount that we'll have to pay, as long as those percentages stay the same, it works itself out.
Yeah, I concur with that, right? It's just, it's not saying how do we allocate grant funding by percentage, we're just taking grant percentage off the top of what we have to pay, adjusting the numbers, keeping 33, 33, 33.
So in essence, we approve percentage, not numbers.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is what your motion was.
Yeah,
Your motion was not
absolutely.
numbers, your
Just
motion was
absolutely.
percentages.
Yeah.
yeah, and that's exactly where this little disclaimer down here. Because everything is getting more expensive for next year.
Yeah.
So these are the numbers that we use to derive our percentages, but these are probably going to be different than the numbers that are adopted in budget just because.
Jim, that's a really good point. I think by the wisdom of this group, by going with a percentage set as opposed to a dollar set or even a millage number set, you build in that flexibility, both with the application of future funding, but also giving the commission some guidance going forward as these things change for whatever reason, whether it's influx of money, it's cost increases, it's Headley rollback, whatever it is, if they can keep this project in their a third, instead of 300,000 from each generating item, like that shows, maybe it's 250 or 400 from each generating rate. With that, and I'm not hearing a lot of objection, though I'm hearing interesting. I thought, Thomas, your point was really interesting in terms of the tax source. If people want to coalesce around that, great, but I'm hearing a lot of coalition around a third, keeping the percentage as close, regardless of what happens up or down in terms of cost. Is that a fair position?
Yes.
Fair is in, do you like it, not fair.
It's really easy to explain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yes.
and that would be helpful too.
Fair and easy to explain.
right.
And I can tell you as the answerers of the phones, that's very important.
As the answer to the phone too. And I guess just to, a thought that popped into my head is that that those fees are based on inflation. And, but, it, but the revenue from the millage tracks that generally, so we're not, if we have sort of runaway, what's the source of the inflation number, the CPI and the Consumer Price Index, or, you know, if there's a, I'm just thinking about our inflationary tendencies in our economy. Does that throw it off somehow, or we're gonna be out of whack with our percentages, or?
I don't think so, just given that there's so much headroom with the millage now, and the other numbers can be adjusted to whatever they need to be.
Okay,
It's gonna be interesting when we get the bids back for the first project. You know, everything right now is based on engineering estimates, and, you know, the engineers know what other projects are doing, but until you open up your present, when you get those bids back, you know, it's a very, very educated guess, but it's still a little bit of a guess in terms of our revenue projections for what we need to raise.
okay.
We'll adjust, and, you know, we have enough reserves. I will say this, we have enough reserves and other things we can do to cushion a blow. If the first project comes in, you know, higher than we thought it was going to, we'll make it work, and then for future budget years, we'll adjust and regroup and move on from there.
James, question for you. Where does the actual document, the recommendation document that goes to the city commission come from? Do you write that and
Yep.
then run it by us, or?
Perfect. If we come around a motion on the way to allocate the grant funding, which was part of our task, I would go ahead and write up a report, and then we can handle it one of two ways. We can come back here next week. You'll have the report in advance of next week's meeting, and we can come back here and make sure that it reads right for all those around the room. Or I can distribute for comments and just take the comments and blend them in and make the report, assuming the report reflects fairly well and I don't need a lot of comments, we don't have to meet next week. I am very open to either. It may be valuable if those that can meet next week, just so we can all be in the room. If there's anything we need to add, I can add it right then and there. But yeah, I will provide a report coming out of this meeting that will summarize the process. And you tested 16 scenarios fully and thoroughly, so if you were keeping track, we can offer that, and we'll offer some of the discussion, the fairness, and the Jamboard we did about equity. So we'll try and do a report, but I'm talking myself into everybody coming, those that can come back next week with having read the report in advance, and then we'll be ready for the next commission meeting.
Yep.
You talked me into coming back next week.
I talked myself there. I didn't start there when I opened my mouth, but I got it.
If people can't make it, they can
Yeah.
provide their comments ahead of time.
Yeah, please, that's a great point, Mark. If you can't make it, it's less a decision and more of a comment making. So if you can give them to me in advance, we will consider them.
And I like that also because it puts us here, there.
Yeah.
It's all open.
That's a great point. I would like, if someone's willing to make a motion to apply grant funding or cost increases, I'm adding that from our mission, at the same percentage funding as was applied for the original scenario.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Sure. To bring it to a vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any objecting? No?
All right, takes us to 8:19. And look at that, we jumped, discussed next steps. Took care of that.
I'm sorry, maybe this needs to go back onto the vote that we just took. Is this something, Jim, that would be applied in the budget considerations for the next year? We're talking about the grant distribution. You know, would it be applied in the next fiscal year? Or is it something that we receive in parcels over a number of years? Or does that vary based on the grant or whatever?
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because this is the return of earmarks, or as they call them, community projects now. So I don't know how this money rolls out, and I don't, and Congressman Levin's office doesn't know how this money rolls out,
Right.
so we don't know when we're gonna get the
Till
money.
after the election.
We'll
3 weeks before.
waiting to see.
Yeah.
So I don't know now what the Kensington water main timeline is for when it's gonna go, because now we're waiting for the federal money and everything else, but,
Okay.
we'll budget for it in the coming year and see what happens, I guess.
Okay, but is it something, though, depending on when you receive the, say you got it as a lump sum then, it would wait then to be allocated into the next year's budget? Or,
Right. I'm hoping we know enough by the time the budget's adopted about when we're going to get that money and how it rolls out, that we can plan for that effectively.
okay,
If we don't have that certainty, then what we'll do is we'll just budget as if we're going to get all of that money in the coming budget year
okay.
and proceed accordingly.
All right, thank you.
And I will say, the one thing I'll add on that is that we set our water rates using a 3-year rate model.
Oh, okay.
And we do our budget based on a 3-year budget, look
Right.
forward. So we plug in the capital projects that we're looking at. And then we set our rates based on, to smooth out over time what it's looking like. So even though the 650,000, it won't be, because then what happens is you avoid drastic ups and downs
Yes.
in the rate over time. So that really will smooth out. And even if that money then comes in a future budget year versus this budget year, given that we've done a 3-year model for how we plan and set rates,
Okay,
it should take care of, rolling that out over time.
thank you.
Okay.
I think we've got public discussion. Robert had asked me a question. I don't know if you wanted to raise it or,
It was just about, now that we've discussed it more, I'm happy to vote for the third. But I don't know what the process would be for that.
Should we, what do we take another vote?
sure.
Okay.
I love that idea.
All right, so, do we need another motion then?
Well, why don't we go with John and Jay's approved motion?
Okay.
And if we want to take another vote at the request of Robert, we can take that vote.
Okay.
And so all those in favor?
Aye.
And opposed?
None, okay,
Okay.
great.
And then that takes us to public comments.
Yeah, so any public discussion? Looks like we have no joiners. We have our next,
Anna's here.
what's that? Did
Do you
you?
have any comments? I'm okay. I'm good.
Oh, yes, well, Anna's here, but do you have any comments or?
I'm good, thank
Okay.
you. Great work, people.
And our meeting's next week. What is it?
22nd.
The 22nd, same time, same place, and then we'll adjourn. Okay.
8:23. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll see whoever wants to join me next week.